The front doors of the Willow Creek police station flew open with such force that they cracked against the walls. Rain pounded the pavement outside, the thunder rolling like distant cannon fire. And in the doorway stood a dog, soaked to the bone, trembling and covered in blood. Shadow, a German shepherd, was broad-shouldered and scarred, barely able to keep himself upright, but he wasn't alone. Clinging to his back, her torn school backpack still strapped to her, was a little girl, pale, unconscious, her arms limp like wet cloth. Her face was smeared with dirt, and her knees were scraped. Her name was Leah Grant. She had been missing for 4 days. For one breathless moment, the officers froze. Nobody moved. Then Sergeant Hayes muttered, "That's her. That's the Grant girl." Shadow, weak and trembling, growled softly as they rushed in. Even in his state, on the brink of collapse, he still shielded the girl, unwilling to let anyone get too close until he was sure she was safe. Where the hell did he come from? A young officer whispered, crouching beside the dog. Shadow didn't answer. He didn't need to. His job wasn't to explain, it was to bring her back. As paramedics worked on Leah, Shadow's eyes never left her face. He was shivering, his ribs visible beneath his matted fur. His breaths were shallow, and yet, when someone reached for the girl's hand, he growled again. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. He had carried her through the darkness, through the storm, and through the fear. But how had he known where to find her? That question hung in the air, unanswered, as they lifted Leah onto a stretcher. Shadow, exhausted and defeated, slumped to the floor beside her as if finally allowing himself to rest. The room was silent except for the soft beeping of monitors and the quiet thump of his tail against the linoleum floor. Before the headlines, before the storm, before the blood, there was just a little girl quietly fading from the center of her own home. Leah Grant was 9 years old, a bright, curious child with big questions and small hands, always reaching out for someone who's too busy to notice her. Her father, Lucas Grant, ran one of the state's most successful food brands, while her mother, Emily, a food scientist and product developer, spent more time in labs and meetings than in bedtime stories. They weren't bad people. They were just busy, too busy. Leah never complained. She simply stopped talking. She spent more time in her room, and her drawings grew darker, lonelier. Sketches of a child floating alone in empty playgrounds. Lucas noticed eventually. On a quiet Saturday, driven more by guilt than instinct, he suggested they visit the local animal shelter. "I don't want a puppy," Leah said as they walked past wagging tails and bright eyes. Then she saw him. Shadow was older than the other dogs. A retired police dog, wounded in the line of duty. He had a small scar near one eye and a tired look that mirrored her own. Jean, the shelter worker, knelt in front of his kennel. "This one," he said, smiling softly. She whispered, "His eyes are sad like mine." Lucas hesitated. "He's been through a lot. So have I." They brought Shadow home that evening. Within weeks, something shifted Leah. Laughing again, she spoke more. She started to draw pictures of a girl and a dog adventuring together. Shadow followed her. Everywhere he waited by the door when she left for school and sat beside her bed at night, listened to her secrets, and never interrupted. Slowly she came back to life, but no one knew just how deep their bond had grown until the day she disappeared. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday. Lucas kissed Leah on the forehead before she climbed out of the car. 3 o'clock, sweetheart," he said. "I'll be right here." Shadow sat quietly in the back seat, his eyes never leaving the little girl as she waved and disappeared through the school gates by 3:15. The parking lot was nearly empty. Lucas checked the time again. No Leah. He looked inside, trying to stay calm. "I am here to pick up my daughter Leah Grant." The receptionist looked up confused. She was already picked up, said it was a family emergency. Lucas froze by ho. The silence that followed was deafening that evening. Lucas and Emily received a call. The voice was distorted, cold, mechanical. "We have your oar. Daughter, if you want her alive, bring $1 million Nepalis. No games, you'll get instruction store." They wanted to call the police, of course they did, but the threat echoed too loudly in Lucas's head. No police or dies, he couldn't risk it, not even a whisper. "What if they're watching?" Lucas said, voice shaking. "What if this is a test?" Emily stared at him through red-rimmed eyes. "So what do? We can't risk sending police sirens. They warned us. What if this is just a test to see if we're listening?" He didn't sleep that night. He didn't eat. He just sat at the edge of the bed, the phone in his hand like a ticking bomb. Emily broke down. Lucas clenched his fists so tight his knuckles turned white, but inside is something deeper cracked open. Lucas Hoddleways prided himself on staying composed under pressure in business and life, but this was different. This was his little girl, and someone had stolen her. His breath turned shallow. Therum seemed to tilt. Guilt poured in fast and thick. Every missed recital, every dinner eaten without her, every time Hesed, "Later, sweetie," and never came back. He stumbled back into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I wasn't there," he whispered. "I wasn't there to protect her." Emily sobbed harder, clutching his arm, but Lucas just stared ahead, eyes wide, hands trembling. The manual once controlled boardrooms now couldn't control his own heart. An nth corner of the room, Shadow began to pace. He sniffed Leela's backpack, her shoes, the front door. He whined, barked, and tried to nudge Lucas toward the hallway, but Lucas was drowning in panish. "Snap, not now, Shadow." He pulled Felish tight and locked the dog in the laundry room. Shadow scratched at the door. He held deep and long, a sound filled with urgency, desperation, but no one was listening. Storm came just after midnight. Rain battered the windows of the Grant home. Thunder cracked like rifle fire overhead, but inside the most terrifying sound wasn't nature. It was something breaking loose. The laundry room door slammed open. Shadow had escaped. The latch had snapped at the leash was shredded. He had clawed and pushed, body trembling, driven by something stronger than instinct. Apromise, he burst into the night, his coat soaked within seconds, mud flying beneath us. Pause, he ran like a dog possessed, not with rage, but with love. He followed Herson through the trees, over fences, across highways. For hours Shadow didn't stop, and then he found it, a faint scent of her shampoo. A trail of footprints off, buried in mud, and the distant hum off a generator. Shadow crouched, ears forward, crawling through the underbrush, and he saw her, Leela, curled in a corner off a concrete cell, shivering lips. Pale Eamon stood near the door, armed and alert. Shadow didn't wait. He lunged through. The narrow shaft slammed into the man's legs, teeth locking on flesh. The guard screamed, stumbling, trying to draw his weapon. Shadow. Leia gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. "Run," he seemed to say. She grabbed thurring of keys from the man's belt, handshaking. Shadow held him down just long enough. The emergency exit creaked open. La bolted into the night. Shadow followed, limping now, blood trailing from a cut along his side. They crashed through the woods. Suddenly beams off flashlights sliced through the trees, closing in. Shadow skidded to a halt. Mud sprang from beneath his paws ahead. A dark figure stepped into their path, blocking the trail, eyes narrowing as he raised something metallic with a hesitation. Shadow pivoted hard to therite, muscles coiling like springs. Leia clung tighter as he crashed through the underbrush, thorns tearing at their skin. But it wasn't over. Another man emerged from behind a tree right in their path, face shadowed, armed and ready. Shadow snarled, lunged. The man screamed and fell back. Leela climbed on Shadow's back hair, and despite pain, despite everything, branches whipped her arms, rain stung her face, but she held on, and Shadow kept going until finally through the trees they saw it, a porch light glowing in the storm. The porch light flickered in the storm, casting shadows across the old wooden steps. Shadow stumbled up them, Leia still clinging weakly to his back. Her fingers were icy, her lips trembled, but was conscious barely. He barked once, harp urgent. The door opened. A woman stood there, startled, mid-30s, raincoat alpha, and her name was Anna. The town's veterinarian. She gasped at the sight of them, the bleeding dog, the soaked child, mud and terror clinging to both. "Oh my God, come in," Shep told them. Inside, dropping to her knees beside Leia, her hands moved quickly, checking for injuries. Wrapping blanket, swiping blood from Shadow's flank. "It's okay now," she whispered. "You're safe." But safety was fragile. 15 minutes later, the front door creaked again. A man stepped in, broad shoulders, muddy boots, hood pulled low. He froze at the scene, unake, kneeling beside a child, Shadow growling low from the corner, fur bristling. It was Eric, Anna's husband, and he hadn't just been a farmer. He'd been hired by the kidnappers as a lookout. Shadow knew. Eric's face hardened. He moved forward, waved to take her back. He said, voice trembling, "They'll come after us if Wedden." Shadow growled, stepping between Leia and the man. Anna's hand shot forward. "Eric, please don't." Eric reached out to grab Isla. Her small chest tightened, her eyes filled with terror. Shadow leapt, nipped at Eric's arm, sinking teeth just enough to force him back. "Stop it!" Eric shouted, recoiling, glared at Shadow, then at Anna and Leia. Anna stepped forward, placing herself between Eric and the girl. "Hesaved her. He saved her life." Blood dripped from Shadow's side, but he didn't move. Eric swallowed conflict in his eyes. Finally, he stepped back. "I didn't see anything," he said, voicing Anna. Exhaled relief flooding her expression. Shad collapsed beside Leia, exhausted but finally safe. The rain hadn't stopped, but Shadow didn't wait. With one last glance back at the house, he nudged Leia gently. She understood. Her small hands gripped the remnants of the blanket Anna had wrapped her in. Together, they vanished into the storm. The woods were darker now, mud sucked at Shadow's paws. Branches whipped at Leia's face. Shouldn't cry. She held on tighter. Every sound could be danger. Every shadow a3, but they moved, quiet, focused, shadowed head, low ears twitching. Leia followed, barefoot, trembling, but never complaining. Gand. Then finally, light in the distance, a flickering red and blue halo. A small county road, a patrol car parked, engine idling. Shadow stumbled into view. First officer, young, mid-20s. Nearly dropped his coffee, his eyes widened. "Jesus." Then saw her. "Dispatch, I need paramedics now." Shadow collapsed onto the wet pavement, Leia still clinging to his fur. "We're safe." The hospital buzzed with quiet urgency. Lucas stood just outside it. ER doors, soaked, shivering, a duffel bag full of ransom money at his feet. Hadn't slept in nearly 2 days. The Cal had come an hour ago. "She's alive. She's coming in now." Every second was Aleph time. Then he saw the McGurney wheeled in, surrounded by EMTs on it. Leia, pale but conscious, wrapped in blanket. Your eyes searched frantically until they found him. "Daddy." He ran, tears already falling. "La." He dropped to his knees. Asa reached for him, her arms rapid errand, his neck tight as she could manage. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, voice breaking. "I thought I had." Shadow murmured, eyes fluttering. "He never lift me." Behind them, another gurney. Shadow, bloodied, unmoving. A nurse called out vitals. Another shouted for a team. Lucas turned, his breath caught in his chest. The dog that brought his daughter home. He was barely hanging on of B. "I wasn't called, but they came anyway." A red flag had been raised when a large cash withdrawal hit federal monitoring systems. The name Lucas Granth, purpose a ransom payment. It wasn't to trigger protocol. By the time Lucas reached the hospital, the agents were already moving. Shadow's Araval with Leia had set the town on fire. But for the FBI, it was the start of something bigger. They approached Lucas carefully. "You didn't call us." Agent Monroe said, "We understand why, but now we need your help." Lucas, still shaken, handed over the burner phone. "The kidnapper insisted I was going to do whatever they said." He confessed he just wanted my daughter back. Using fecal logs, the agents traced pings from nearby cell towers, each location arrowing the search radius. Then came the final piece. Shadow, the bloody German shepherd, had traces of a unique soil composition on his fur, clay, heavy mineralage specific to one part of Thefrist. The canine unit brought in another working dog trained to track Thiessen trail Shadow had left behind. Idled them deep into the woods to a cluster of abandoned bunkers hidden by overgrowth. Inside, they found evidence of duct tape, discarded food wrapper, Silas, torn school uniform, but the place was empty. They were gone, however. One off the wrappers had a partial fingerprint. A match in the system came back fast. Marcus Vale, a known associate of Amanamid Greg Fallon. Businessman Philip Trent and now prime suspect Fallon had built a facade youth center scholarships. Charity work, but the truth was rotting beneath Agent Monroe Tornado. His team were not just dealing with own kidnapping, she said. This is bigger organized, and we have our lead. What began as a single kidnapping unraveled into something far darker, with Leela safe and Shadow recovering. The Phoebe launched a full investigation into the group behind her abduction. The burner phone Lucas turned over became their first clue. Metadata from call logs led to disposable SIM cards purchased across state lines using surveillance. Footage from gas stations and retail stores identified several suspects' fingerprints in discarded packaging found at the bunker, linked back to Marcus Vale, a convicted felon tied to an underground network of short-term hires. 4 high-risk operations. One by one the pieces came together. A name resurfaced: Greg Fallon, a wealthy businessman known for his public charity work and youth mentorship programs, but behind polished speeches and smiling photographs he built a spiderweb of criminal activity, using his organizations to recruit vulnerable individuals for trafficking and extortion. Shadow's trail, confirmed by soil analysis and scent tracking, pinpointed the locations of several drop sites, all matching areas near Fallon's properties. Undercover agents posing as stoners were able to infiltrate one of his youth centers, uncovering hidden rooms and coded files. Armed with evidence, the FBI conducted simultaneous raids in 3 states. Dozens were arrested, including Fallon. The media erupted. What the world saw was a man finally unmasked, but for those closest to the case, it was justice earned, not given. Weeks later, the storm had passed, but its shadows lingered. Leia returned to school, though she was quieter, no more thoughtful, more aware. Shadow still won't, but each morning he woke urgently with a soft nudge, his amber eyes calmer than ever. Together they carried unseen scars and an unbreakable bond. Lucas and Emily made a promise never to see again. Dinner time became sacred. Acants to listen to Illa's day, share stories, rebuild trust, and no one missed a knife. He even started volunteering at the animal shelter where Shadow was found. Under Luna's watchful eye, they prepared food packages with Leia using her own drawings on the bags. Each bag said in her handwriting, "Friend forever." Anand Eric participated quietly, their names never in the papers, but every week Leia left a bouquet at Anna's doorstep. Aslan, thank you for saving her life. Meanwhile, the headlines had changed. Greg Fallon faced life sentences, his empire flies. Crumbled headlines read, Charity King behind bars, dog leads to justice. Shadow, the hero saves a child. FBI agent Monroe visited the Grant house one afternoon. She brought a framed photo. Leia and Shadow taken by the hospital photograph, 2 souls who refused to be broken. Lucas shook her hand, tears in his eyes. Thank you, he said softly, for believing. Monroe smiled. No thank you for sharing him. That evening, storm clouds gathered again off the back porch. Leia held Shadow's leash firmly. Lucas stood beside her. They waited. A single thunderclap echoed. Shadow lifted his shed ears, twitching. Leia whispered, "We're okay now." Leaning down, Lucas shrugged. Them both, because we're together. The lightning split the sky bright and sudden. Shadow let out a soft bark. Leela jiggled, and for the first time in a long time, she no longer felt forgotten, because Shadow didn't just bring her home, he brought her family.